Hey everyone, Dragon Stories here with a new story. Let's begin. I want you to picture the most put-together woman you've ever seen in your life. Not just beautiful. I mean the kind of person who walks into a room and the whole energy shifts. That was Eliza, my wife. And I'm telling you this story because 6 months ago, she disappeared. Left divorce papers on our kitchen table and vanished like she was never there. And the reason she told me, when I finally found her, it froze something inside me that I don't think will ever fully thaw. But let me start from the beginning because none of this makes sense without it. I'm Alex. I was 34 when all of this happened. I ran a mid-sized logistics company in Chicago. Nothing flashy, but solid, comfortable. The kind of life where you work hard and you can actually see the results. I met Eliza at a business conference 7 years before any of this went down. She was presenting a case study on supply chain restructuring. And she was the only person in that room who actually knew what she was talking about. I wasn't supposed to fall in love that weekend. But she laughed at something I said. This low, genuine laugh, not polished or performed. And that was it for me. We dated for 2 years, got married, had our daughter Lily 3 years in. And for a while, life was exactly what it was supposed to be. Eliza had built her own consulting firm from scratch. Small team, major clients, serious reputation. She worked long hours, but she never once made our family feel like second priority. That's the thing about her that people on the outside couldn't always see. To strangers, she looked like ambition personified. Sharp suit, sharp answers, sharp everything. But the moment she walked through our front door, she became someone else entirely. Someone softer. Someone who got down on the floor with Lily and built towers out of wooden blocks and pretended they were castles. Someone who remembered every small detail. The way I liked my coffee, the podcast I mentioned once in passing, the anniversary of my dad's death that I barely talked about. She noticed everything. That was Eliza. And every morning I drive to work thinking, I don't know what I did to deserve this. I genuinely didn't. But I had it. And I thought I understood what I had. I didn't. Not completely. Because there was one part of our life I kept convincing myself wasn't as bad as it looked. And that was my mother, Victoria. My mother is the kind of woman who can smile at you and make you feel like you're being evaluated at the same time. She came from old money, her words, not mine. And she had this very specific idea of what a proper family looked like. Proper neighborhood, proper background, proper wife. And Eliza, despite everything she had built, despite who she was as a human being, never quite fit my mother's image of what that word meant. I noticed it early. Little comments at Sunday dinners. A raised eyebrow when Eliza talked about a deal she closed. A slight pause before complimenting her outfit. Just long enough to sting. My mother never screamed. She never caused scenes. She operated in that precise, surgical way where you could never quite point to one specific thing and say, there. That's what she did. But it accumulated. It always does. I remember one evening, Lily was maybe 2½ I came home from a late meeting and found Eliza in the kitchen. Lily on her hip. Both of them laughing at something on the counter. I stood in the doorway for a second just watching. Lily kept patting Eliza's cheek with both hands like she was the best thing she'd ever touched. And Eliza was glowing. Completely, genuinely glowing. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table. She wasn't saying anything. She was just watching them with this expression I can only describe as quiet disapproval. Like she was observing something that didn't belong in the frame. I walked in, kissed Eliza on the cheek, took Lily, and tried to act like the air wasn't heavy. But I felt it. I always felt it when my mother was in the room with Eliza. There was a specific Wednesday evening. This was about 4 months before everything fell apart where I came home early and found my mother in the living room along with Eliza. Lily was already in bed. I heard my mother's voice before I opened the door. That measured, careful tone she used when she wanted to say something without it sounding like what it was. I stopped in the hallway. I'm not proud of that. But I stopped. And I heard her say, "You've done well for yourself. I'll give you that. But Alexander has a future that requires a certain kind of partner. And I think, deep down, you know you're not quite that." I walked in right after. Eliza looked at me. Her expression was perfectly calm. She had this extraordinary ability to not show what was happening underneath. And she just said, "Your mom and I were catching up." My mother smiled. I looked between the two of them and felt something I didn't have the courage to name out loud. That night, when we were alone, I asked Eliza if she was okay. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "I'm always okay, Alex." That was her answer. And I accepted it because I didn't know how to push harder without pulling something open that I wasn't ready to deal with. That was my failure. I knew my mother was saying things. I knew it was more than just dinner table tension. But I kept telling myself that Eliza was strong. And she was. She absolutely was. And that things would settle on their own. I kept waiting for the right moment to have the real conversation with my mother. To set the line clearly. To say, "This is my family. And you will respect her." Full stop. But I waited too long. And by the time I realized how deep the damage had gone, Eliza was already gone. I found the papers on a Thursday morning. I remember that detail because I had a 9 a.m. call with a client I'd been chasing for 3 months. And my brain was already halfway into work mode when I walked into the kitchen. The coffee was still warm in the pot, which meant she hadn't left long ago. The papers were sitting right in the center of the table, squared up neatly. Like she'd taken a moment to make sure they were perfectly aligned. That was so Eliza. Even in the worst moment of our marriage, she was precise. I stood there holding them for I don't know how long. My phone buzzed. The 9 a.m. client. I let it ring. I walked through every room in the house. Her closet, half empty. Her bathroom, the essentials gone. No note. No explanation. Just the papers and the quiet. Lily was at my sister's for the week, which I now think wasn't a coincidence. Eliza had planned this. She'd chosen a window when our daughter wouldn't be in the house to feel the shift. Even leaving, she was protecting Lily. That hit me harder than anything else. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I don't even know why the floor. I just couldn't make it to a chair. And I stayed there for a long time. I kept turning over every conversation from the past few weeks, looking for the sign I'd missed. There were small things I brushed off. She'd been quieter than usual at dinner. She stopped mentioning future plans. A trip we talked about. A renovation we'd been debating. She'd hug Lily a little longer than normal before bed a few nights in a row. I thought she was tired. I thought it was work. I was wrong about almost everything. The divorce process is brutal in a way that nobody warns you about. It's not just the legal side, the paperwork, the lawyers, the waiting. It's the specific loneliness of dismantling something you built together. I hired an attorney and started the process. But for the first 2 months, I couldn't get Eliza on the phone. Her number went straight to voicemail. Her office said she'd taken an indefinite leave. Her assistant, the one I'd met a dozen times at company events, wouldn't tell me anything beyond that. It was like she'd stepped out of her own life completely. I drove past our old spots. The coffee place near her office, where we used to meet on Friday afternoons. The park where we took Lily on weekends. I wasn't looking for her exactly. I knew she wasn't going to be sitting there. I just needed to be in spaces that still had her in them somehow. I was not doing well. I want to be honest about that. I stopped cooking. I ate whatever was easy and forgettable. I lost weight I didn't intend to lose. I started going to bed at 9 o'clock just to stop being awake. My sister took Lily more than she should have had to. And I am still grateful for that. The worst part wasn't the empty side of the bed or the missing half of the closet. The worst part was not understanding why. Because if I'd done something, if I had been the problem, I could have worked with that. I could have looked at myself and said, okay, this is where I failed. This is what I need to fix. But I didn't have that. I had divorce papers and silence and a warm coffee pot. Around the 2-month mark, I started to think more clearly. I went back through everything I knew about that last period before she left. And I kept coming back to my mother. The comments. The dinners. That specific evening in the living room that I'd walked in on and then walked away from without doing anything real about it. I called my mother and asked her directly if she'd spoken to Eliza about leaving. There was a pause. Just a half second too long. And then she said, "I only ever wanted what was best for you, Alexander." That was all I needed to hear. That pause told me everything. I didn't blow up the call. I kept my voice level and ended it politely. and then sat in my car in the parking garage of my office building for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel. My mother hadn't just commented or implied. She had done something deliberate. I didn't know the full shape of it yet, but I knew it was there. I started working longer hours. Not to escape, but because keeping my hands busy was the only thing that kept my head from going to dark places. I restructured 2 departments. I took on a client in Denver that required me to travel, which my therapist, yes, I started seeing a therapist, and I'd recommend it to anyone, said was actually useful because it forced me to function. But every night, no matter where I was, I thought about Eliza. I thought about the way she looked at Lily, the way she said my name when she was genuinely happy about something. Not performed happiness, but the real kind that catches you off guard. I thought about her laugh in that conference room 7 years ago, and I thought, she didn't leave because she stopped loving us. She left because something made her feel like she had to. That distinction mattered to me. It kept me from becoming bitter. It kept me looking. The divorce paperwork stalled. Her attorney, and she had a good one, filed for an extension on multiple occasions. Looking back, I think that was intentional, too. I think some part of her wasn't fully ready to close the door, or maybe she was protecting herself while she figured out what came next. I didn't know, but I noticed. And about a month before I finally found her, I got a single text from an unknown number. It said, "She's okay. She just needs time." That was it. No name, no context. I tried to reply, the message didn't go through. I later found out it was her colleague, Sarah, the woman whose apartment had been staying in, who sent it without Eliza knowing. Sarah had found my number through a mutual contact and just wanted me to stop worrying. At the time, though, I had no idea. I stared at that text for 3 days and held on to it like it was oxygen. I found her on a Friday afternoon in late October, 6 months and 11 days after she disappeared. I wasn't even supposed to be in that part of the city. I had a meeting near the west side that got canceled last minute, and I was driving back when I passed a construction site on Halstead Street. One of those big commercial builds, scaffolding everywhere, workers in hard hats and high-visibility vests moving around the perimeter. I almost didn't stop. I don't know what made me look twice. Maybe it was the way one of the workers moved, that specific kind of confident, purposeful stride that I'd watched cross our kitchen 1,000 times. I pulled over. I sat in the car and watched, and then she turned around. It was Eliza. She was in work boots and an orange safety vest over a worn jacket. Her hair pulled back tight under a hard hat, a clipboard in her hand. She was talking to a site supervisor, pointing at something on the plans, completely in her element. Later, I understood what she was doing there. She'd taken a project coordinator role through a contact from her old network, something hands-on and grounded that had nothing to do with the world she'd stepped away from. She looked tired. She looked thinner than I remembered, but she also looked, and this is the part that broke me open, she looked like herself. Not the version of herself that had been slowly worn down over dinner tables and living room conversations, the original version, the one from the conference, the one who knew exactly who she was. I got out of the car. I walked across the street. She saw me when I was about 20 feet away, and she stopped mid-sentence. The supervisor looked confused. Eliza handed him the clipboard without looking at it and walked toward me. We stood there on the sidewalk, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. There was construction noise all around us, drills, machinery, someone shouting measurements. And in the middle of all of it, we were just completely still. Then she said, "How did you find me?" And I said, "I wasn't looking today. I think I just needed to." She looked down at her boots. She pressed her lips together the way she always did when she was trying to hold something in. And then, quietly, without looking up, she told me everything. She told me that my mother had come to her office 2 weeks before she left. Not the house, her office, professional territory where Eliza couldn't just walk away. Victoria had sat across from her desk and told her, calmly and precisely, that Alex's future required a different kind of foundation, that Eliza's background, her personality, her way of doing things, it was holding me back. That the kindest thing she could do for me and for Lily was to step away cleanly before she did more damage. And then my mother had put a folder on Eliza's desk. Inside were documents, fabricated ones. Victoria had an old friend, a disbarred attorney she'd known for decades, who had put the paperwork together for her. That made it look like I had been quietly building a case to end the marriage myself. Fake correspondence, a fake consultation with a divorce attorney dated 4 months prior, things designed to make Eliza believe that I was already on my way out and had just not told her yet. Eliza had sat with that folder for 2 weeks, 2 weeks of looking at me across the dinner table, watching me play with Lily, wondering if everything had been a performance. She said she hadn't confronted me because she was terrified that it was real. And when you're already being told by someone every week in 100 small ways that you don't belong, eventually the doubt gets a foothold. She left because she believed I was already leaving. She left to keep her dignity intact. I stood on that sidewalk and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, exactly, more like the specific grief of understanding how close we had come to losing everything over a lie. I reached out and I took her hand. She didn't pull away. She looked up at me and I said, "None of it was real. None of it. I was never leaving you." She didn't say anything. She just held onto my hand and closed her eyes for a second. That was enough. Getting the divorce process formally paused took 3 weeks. During that time, Eliza stayed at Sarah's apartment. She wasn't ready to just walk back in like nothing had happened, and I respected that. We met for coffee. We talked for hours. We rebuilt the language of us slowly and carefully, the way you'd handle something that had been cracked but not broken all the way through. Lily didn't fully understand what had been happening, but kids feel things even when you don't explain them. The first time Eliza came back to the house, Lily ran to her from across the living room and grabbed her around the legs and just held on. I had to leave the room. Then came my mother. I had been preparing for that conversation for weeks. I wasn't going to do it over the phone. I drove to her house on a Sunday, and I sat down across from her in the same living room where she used to watch Eliza with that quiet, measuring look. She started talking before I could, something about intentions, about doing what she thought was right, about family legacy and what she'd built and what she wanted to protect. I let her finish, and then I said, "You walked into my wife's office, and you lied to her. You used forged documents to make her believe I wanted to leave her. You drove her out of our home and away from our daughter, and you are going to have to live with that." She tried to respond. I held up my hand. I told her that I loved her because she was my mother and that was not going to change. But I told her that she would not be in our home unsupervised. She would not have private conversations with Eliza. She would not have any role in decisions that affected my family. And if any of that was unacceptable to her, then the distance between us would grow accordingly. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "I did what I thought was right." I stood up. I said, "I know. That's the most painful part." And I left. Eliza moved back home 6 weeks after I found her on that construction site. We didn't throw a party. We didn't make a big moment out of it. She just came back, and Lily helped carry one of her bags inside, and the 3 of us had dinner together, and it felt ordinary, quietly, completely ordinary. And after everything, ordinary felt like the most extraordinary thing in the world. I think about that folder sometimes, about how close my mother came to succeeding, about how 2 weeks of silence from Eliza could have become permanent, about all the small moments that nearly didn't happen. Lily's laugh at breakfast, Eliza's hand finding mine on the couch without either of us thinking about it, the specific quiet of our house when everyone is home and safe. I'm not going to tell you our life is perfect now. My relationship with my mother is different, formal in a way it never used to be, careful in a way that is sometimes lonely. Eliza and I are still working through things in therapy, together, because some damage takes time and you don't rush it. But when I look at my wife, this woman who packed half a closet and went to work on a construction site in the cold because she needed to feel solid ground under her feet again, I feel something I don't have a clean word for. It's not just love. It's closer to awe. She didn't fall apart. She didn't disappear into bitterness. She built something with her hands while she was waiting to understand what was true. And when the truth came, she chose us anyway. That's who Eliza is. That was always who she was. I just had to become someone worthy of it. What we can learn from Alex's story. Speak up early. Silence isn't neutral, it's a choice. If you don't defend your partner against family interference immediately, you're helping destroy your own home. Talk, don't guess. One honest conversation is worth 1,000 assumptions. Don't let a folder of lies or fear replace a direct talk with the person you love. Set hard boundaries. Family care shouldn't feel like control. You can love your parents while still banning them from making decisions for your wife and kids.